We're giving away the secrets to our method of digitally and physically finding big bucks on public ground.
This mini-series is powered by onX, and we deep dive into what we look for on a map, how we scout it in person, and what pins we use to help us effectively hunt deer.
This is
Public Pins.
Call me the Joker, call me the fool.
We have made it into the southeast part of the country on our little road trip here today. And you know what there is a lot of in this area of the country? Creeks. You know how you spell that? C-R-E-E-K.
The E makes a long E sound?
It's long E. It's not C-R-I-C-K.
Yeah.
That would be crick.
Something you get for
Short
your neck.
for cricket. So these are creeks, and creeks have bends, and they're windy and all this kind of stuff, and they're a great, great place to hunt deer. We hunt deer around creeks all the time, and there's a really particular place, a pin, you could say, that we like to target when we're out on public land in Texas and elsewhere that we find whitetails around, and that is a creek horn. Can you explain to me what a creek horn is, Tyler?
So much emphasis, man. So much emphasis.
That's right.
It is not a creek corn.
No.
It's a creek horn.
No, Jimmy, nothing.
No corn involved here.
Yeah.
So a creek horn is the horn of a creek.
That's right.
And so if you look at a creek, typically the more downhill gradient a landscape has, the straighter the creek goes, the faster the water goes. And whenever it hits a flatter spot, which you can use your hybrid mode or your topo mode on X to find places that are flatter than steeper, a lot of times you get these this water coming downhill, and then it gets to a flat spot that can go anywhere it wants to, pretty much. So it starts to wind really just back and forth. It kind of winds through this flat spot, creates these big hooks or these bends out in the creek. And when you see one that is a little more exaggerated than the others, we tend to think of them as creek horns, and they are a good place to kill a whitetail deer.
Yeah, you might know it as like an oxbow or something. Some people call them that.
Mm-hmm.
We call them creek horns, and it's just a thing where we know whitetails travel up and down these riparian areas, and it kind of concentrates the deer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a motif for scouting is that you're looking for a place that deer concentrate because you're looking to up your odds of encountering a deer you want to shoot when you're in the woods, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of the whole premise behind what we do when we're scouting the deer woods.
That's right. So in what situation do you like hunting, or what part of the season do you like hunting these creek horns?
Creek horns. Kind of two that I can really think of that they work well on. I think they work really well for mornings with deer leaving food and going back to bed, because I feel like deer meander a little bit more on the way back to bed, and I feel like a lot of times deer in the evenings are kind of more on a beeline headed to food often, but a lot of times it makes me think of a place that we hunt here in Texas where like you just kind of set up here, and in the morning a deer might run by or walk by, and then here a little bit later here comes some does, and there's a little buck, you know, like it's a good place to kind of catch deer just kind of lollygagging before bed, because they use these creeks as highways, right? Like the major trails that you're going to find along a creek system are right along the creek. And the reason a creek horn is good is because if there are other minor trails or deer that are kind of meandering around out in the creek bottom, it all kind of necks down, and it's pretty much a funnel at that point in time. And of course, you can't mention funnels without mentioning that the rut is a great time to hunt a funnel, because bucks are going to run around a whole bunch. And if you can concentrate them and control their movements and send them through a smaller area, you know that there will be more deer or more bucks that come by that spot.
Yeah. So essentially this creek horn is squeezing the deer up against something else a lot of times.
Yeah,
and
they work really good when you find a creek horn that's kind of near a public-private boundary that, say, that private land has some cattle pasture in it.
Yeah. Or a lot of times I found if you find a creek horn that comes up next to a ridge that's pretty steep, then there's a gap there, a narrow chute between the ridge and the creek horn that a lot of times can squeeze deer in. So
sometimes they don't like it too thin right there, though.
Yeah.
Like they will end up not using it if it's like just like a couple feet or something. They're not big on that.
Yeah, so talk about that and how you find them on the map, and how maybe you find places that you normally would find a creek horn in a good place of travel that may get them a little bit too anxious to run through the gauntlet there.
Well, it's probably the easiest thing there is to find on a map, because you find a creek and you can just literally, you can find it with the aerial, you can find it with hybrid, or you can find it with topo all on Onyx. You can see where a creek bends, right? One of the things you do have to watch out on topo, however, is sometimes the old topographical layers that have just been used for forever, and creeks do meander and move through time. So, it might not be exactly how it looks on the topo map, but it will be pretty close on the aerials normally.
We didn't rank it either. What do you rank this as?
It's definitely top end. I think creek horns are like in that 3 to 4 range, something like that.
I got you. I put it a little lower than that. I think I'm more in that 6 or 7 range on this one.
Yeah.
I think if you can pair it with if you pair it with a different attribute of some sorts that helps you to really make, like I said, like with a ridge or something like that, or a field edge, obviously those are good. But other things, if you find a scrape that's on the edge of that creek horn, then that's good.
Ooh, baby.
I think that also when we're talking about finding these on a map, if you follow a creek, there's going to be bends, right, back and forth. This is an exaggerated bend.
Yes.
This is not just a normal bend, Like not every bend works out as one of these, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing to bring up, where you can imagine like looking at something with a microscope, and then you kind of take the microscope away, and then you just look at it like on a sheet of paper or whatever it is, on your microscope slide. It looks a lot different. Like, it can look real squiggly through the microscope. When you look at it, with the naked eye, it's kind of straight lines. That's how you need to think about creek horns. Like the little bitty squiggly bends of a creek just kind of meandering, that's not it. It would be like if you, flew up in a jet plane 30,000 feet up, and you look down and you can see a big, like 90-degree turn in the trajectory of a creek, right? That's going to be a creek horn. It's going to be one of those places that is overly exaggerated. And you were talking about, how do you find them where they're really good pinches? I think you need good habitat on both sides of that creek horn. So you might be looking for, really good wooded areas or some good grasslands or whatever. And then, like we were saying, if there's one kind of close to a public-private boundary or a ridge, you can find where there are ridges by looking at the topographical lines and, seeing how close they are together. If they're a lot closer together than they are in the surrounding area, that's a very steep rise. And you don't want that creek horn to push right up against that, because then you're just kind of talking about a creek bank, and the deer aren't going to walk that, But if you can get that to be 30 or 40 yards wide, those deer feel real comfortable going through there.
Yeah, for sure. So we've located our creek horn on a map, and we drop a white hot X on there, like you like to say, and we want to go in there and look at it with our eyes. We get in there. What are we looking for in that area to help us understand if this is a spot that we need to hunt, first of all, and then how we're going to hunt it?
I think you need to make sure that that creek that you are working around is deep enough, either with water or just steep banks, that it's not easily crossed by deer. So a deer will walk a straight line if it's the path of least resistance, right? And a creek that's shallow and has, short banks, they can cross that kind of willy-nilly anytime they want to, right? But if you take a creek that maybe has 5 or 6 feet of water in it, or has steep inclined banks, they're not going to cross that thing just readily. So they're going to walk along the edges, and they're going to go around these horns. I think you pair that with trails and deer sign. You need to have a place that the deer are using actively fairly often, right? Otherwise, you can still go in there and not have very good sits.
I think the whole idea around this creek horn is that it pushes deer down, it funnels them down. And so if you get in there and the creek horn doesn't have a trail that's pretty close to it, that's beat down pretty good, then it's probably not a place to hunt. I mean, it's not doing what you want it to do. The reason you're there, there's no there's probably no draw for food. This is a place that is a transitional spot for deer. They're typically moving through to go to bedding or to food. So the trail, and another thing is, it's typically around these creek systems, you've got a lot of water, right? And so it's a wet, lowland area. The trail ought to be beat down, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because of that, it's wetland, and if there's enough deer using it to make it worth your time, it ought to look like one of the better trails you've seen all season, I think. And it ought to be pretty close to that creek horn, and it ought to be going probably in the parallel direction as the creek for the most part.
I think too that if you're not very experienced with this habitat feature, it's a pretty good thing to hang a trail camera on to maybe get a better understanding of how the deer are using the area. It's almost bordering on this concept we call DMA, which is a deer movement area, where you have to have a lot of attributing factors for it to line up and be really good, right? There's the main thing, of course, about a creek horn is the fact that it is a giant bend in the creek, but it has to have some other stuff going for it to be a pretty good hunting spot.
And I feel like a creek horn is a great place to hunt. I feel like it's a good place. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. What are we looking for when we go in and we find that trail that's really beat down, it's good, and we think, okay, I need to be here on November 8th. What am I looking for to hunt that place?
Of course, a decent tree. You might be also thinking about, of course, wind direction, but you might be thinking about intersecting trails and how bucks are going to use it as opposed to does. Like you might have a situation where you have does that are going from one direction to another on the creek or along the trail beside the creek. But then you might have bucks that are, 10 or 15 yards off of that trail that are smelling what's going on over there at that pinch point or whatever. And anywhere you get a pinch like this, there's a good chance that there's a decent amount of sign, maybe even a hub scrape around that's going to kind of be a place for those deer to lay down sign intentionally.
Yeah, and we actually found one of these places in our postseason scouting there in Texas on some public that we were looking at, trying to find some new areas and some new spots and looking at new public. And so this set up pretty well. It was January, I think, when we found it. We hung a trail camera, and right off the bat got a pretty good deer on camera right there. And I think one thing that, before I talk about kind of how I'd hunt it, is that I look at in this is also, you talked about it, but it's got to have good cover on both sides. But if there's like in this particular situation, this is the way it happens, but if there's a a lot of times those river bottoms, those creek bottoms, you got river bottom ash and some kind of like what people consider junk trees down there, and then there's a rise up to the kind of upland habitat. You get some cedars, you get more post oaks and stuff up there kind of as that rise happens, and it happens pretty quick actually in this one spot next to the river bend or the creek bend. And so
just around the river bend.
And so it creates that kind of little funnel there. This place sets up really nice, So I think for me, when I think about hunting a creek horn, I think about hunting it during the rut. I like the thought of hunting a creek horn during the rut because you're going to get deer traveling up and down these creek systems to get to different places, to check different doe bedding. And I like the idea of sitting in a tree that blows the wind towards the creek because technically you're not really hunting anything on the other side of the creek a lot of times. And then I also would say, as kind of a caveat here, that even blowing your wind at the trail I think is okay, because if the tree sets up best, that if the best tree for you that sets up the best is blowing the wind at the trail, I think it's okay if you have an assumption about which direction the deer's coming from, or if you think you can get a shot before the deer gets to your wind. Because I feel like during cruising parts of the rut especially, which is, there's a good chance at all times, but like say you're hunting in there at 2 p.m. on November 7th, there's a good chance that you see a buck come by himself cruising. You know what I mean? And if he comes by with a doe, it's that time of year where it's like the doe is probably going to be just getting hounded. You know what I mean? And so there's a good chance she runs through your wind. So I don't think you have to worry, you prefer to not blow your wind at a deer.
Mm-hmm.
But if you feel like that's what the play is, I think this is one of your best situations to set up with your wind blowing at the trail the deer are going to be coming down, because you got an opportunity to shoot the deer before it gets to your wind.
There's also this concept that I think we need to touch on. If you're hunting a very still day, which happens a lot in these little creek bottoms because it's kind of low country and it doesn't get a lot of wind down in there, the water will always be colder than the surrounding air temperature. So that's going to, if it's very still, it's going to suck your wind down to the creek. Even if it's a projected day where you're going to have an east wind, but the creek is actually on the east of you. If it's a light and variable type east wind, you know, like you're actually going to get some west whenever you're sitting there in the tree if you're right next to that creek. So it's kind of a tool you can use to kind of trick the deer's nose almost.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. And it also continues our thought of this is a great place to hunt, because typically your wind is going to get sucked down into the creek for the most part, and that's going to help you in almost, I can't see a situation where it doesn't really help you, you know?
Yeah.
So these are, good spots to hunt. Now, as far as, you go in there, you find this place, and you start thinking, say you're in there in October or something, or September, and you find this place, you're like, man, this is going to be awesome, early November. What are you marking in there on the map to kind of help you understand what you're looking at for next time you go in there?
In this situation, it's kind of like those stage and feeding areas and fence crossings and stuff. Like the trail really matters a lot in this situation. You're shooting deer walking down a trail or near the trail, right? In most scenarios. So I think that number one, that's the huge thing that jumps out on me is where is the trail and how close does it get to the tree that you're trying to hunt. So I guess with that, you probably need to mark that tree that you're deciding that you're going to hunt on. I think that you probably, of course, need to figure out what wind direction that this place is going to hunt best on and try to target it on that. One of the issues about these little or big creek horns like this is that sometimes access is tricky because it's habitat all the way around this thing. So you have to decide what's the best way to access this without disturbing the deer. And again, this is kind of where I'm a little countercultural in the whitetail world. I like mornings for this. And I like to hunt mornings a lot. And I think that this is a great spot to hunt a morning because you can get in a lot cleaner in a morning in this scenario than you can in the evening, because the deer are not in the bed or they're not down in the deep cover a lot of times. They're up on the fields or they're up in the more open stuff running around, especially, in during the rut. You're going to have does that are out eating and bucks that are chasing them. So you'll be able to go in, in the morning, find, kind of the path of least resistance. Of course, don't blow your wind at places you think there are deer. But if you can get set up early, you can get in there just real clean and have a good hunt.
Yeah, I think another thing to explore when you're talking about access is the water access, because these creeks are typically, like we talked about, going to be bigger creeks. So you have an opportunity to kayak or canoe in, sometimes maybe even take a real boat in on these places, especially if it's a river or something. And so for me, I think a couple of things that I would mark is the actual landing spot for your boat.
That's a good point.
So a lot of times that's like a tiny little feeder creek that feeds in, so you have a little kind of flat spot to nudge it into. And then also the boat ramp that you want to launch from. There's a boat ramp icon that you can use on Onyx as well. So I would drop that there so you know that. And then you can use line distance and work your way down the creek, which you usually can see from most aerials, and just figure out, like, this is how long this boat commute is, and this is how long it will take me probably going at, the speed of whatever you're utilizing, essentially. So you can plan on how early you need to get up, so you know what time you need to get in there.
Usually way too early for me, but hey, it's what you got to do. It's okay if by the end of the hunting season you look like you're just an old tired man. You can just eat a bunch of Taco Bell that spring and just feel a lot better about yourself. But it's a great place to hunt and kill deer. If you're into this kind of stuff and feel like you need more, you can check out our Map Scout Challenge series on YouTube. These are the most comprehensive scouting videos on the internet.
Make sure and subscribe while you're there, and also remember, this is your element.
Live in it.